I'm going to just give you a couple of details on my career that I think are relevant to today's presentation. I was a professor at Temple University for 40 years. I had my dream job there, wonderful people to work with, and a career that was totally satisfying to me. But somehow I've been able to adjust to retirement very happily, in spite of that. You have my email address there. I've talked to some people during the break. Please feel free to get in touch with me to discuss anything that's on your mind about ABA. I'd be happy to do that. I respond very quickly to people's emails. And I love this field. As a faculty, emeritus faculty, I'm still on campus every couple of weeks working with students, so I'm a lifer with respect to this field, even though I'm no longer on faculty at Temple University. And then something else a couple other things that are relevant that were part of my career was I was in graduate school at Florida State University from 1965 to 1970. And that was all fortuitous. But what's relevant about that is that's when this field was being developed. It was some of the people at Florida State, not too many, but Bill Hopkins was there, but it was being developed at the University of Washington, the University of Arizona. So I was an incredibly fortunate person to be in graduate school while the field was being formed. I was not one of the founders of the field. I was just in graduate school while it was being done. I was immediately attracted to it, and that attraction has not diminished. And then after I finished my graduate school career, I finished graduate school at Florida State, I did a postdoctorate at the University of Kansas. And so that was another good fortune. My mentor at the University of Kansas was a man named Vance Hall. He was the author of the first article of the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. He was in charge of the Juniper Gardens Project. He is now 87 years old. We stay in touch. And his boss, we had a reunion 2 years ago, a 50-year reunion of the Juniper Gardens Project. Vance was 85 at the time. His boss, Dick Schiefelbusch, was 95. He was also there. So hopefully being an ABA predicts a long life. So being at the University of Kansas was another piece of good fortune. When I was finishing up my career at Florida State, I'm going to have to put a throat lozenge in here. So when I was finishing my career at Florida State University, I wrote to Vance Hall. He was already a major figure in the field, and I was super attracted to what he was doing. I wrote to him, I said, Dr. Hall, is there any chance I could do a postdoctorate with you? You know, this is one of these things, well, you're probably never going to hear back or anything like that. And that I got a phone call. I didn't have a phone at the time, but he called the phone that we were using, and they called me in to talk to him. So, well, you wrote to me, I'm Vance Hall, and you wrote to me about doing a postdoctorate at the University of Kansas. And he said to me, I don't know what a postdoctorate is. I never had one before. So he said, I'll get back, I'll find out if you can do this. And I thought I had no chance of getting it. And I was the first one to apply for a postdoctorate at the Juniper Gardens Project at the University of Kansas. And since that time, there have been, I think, 200 people have done that. So I had some good luck. There was nobody who's even applying for these things. So I had the good fortune of being in the right place at the right time. So, okay, so what I want to do is I want to start off, let's see if I pressed the right one. I did, thank you, okay. I want to start off with a brief history of behavior analysis. Notice I have behavior analysis, not applied behavior analysis, and then work my way into the topic that we're going to have today. Okay, so you take a look there and you see, you're probably familiar with Skinner, 1938, 1953. In Skinner's original work, 1938, he laid out the foundations of behavioral psychology. And that was then, that was in the behavior of organisms, and then 15 years later, he restated these principles, and really through most of his career, but he restated in the science of human behavior. And what is remarkable about this, you take a look at the year 1938. The principles that he laid out in the behavior of organisms have stood up now for almost 80 years. People who work in this field have seen very little reason to alter those principles. And that's a pretty remarkable outcome for anything in psychology. How many things can you name in psychology that last 80 years? Things come and go. You know, when I had my basic courses in psychology, the introspection, there were different things come and go in psychology. But you take a look at this, Skinner in 1938, and still has tremendous relevance for what we're doing today. That's, I think, a fairly amazing outcome given what's happening, is typically happening in psychology. There's some things to say about Skinner's work. First of all, in addition to the fact that the principles stand up, he devised these principles basically working with non-humans. He was doing what was called analogic research. And people who would criticize him would say, well, he studied animals, rats and pigeons. He studied non-human animals and talked about humans. That was wrong. But we've come along and found out, well, that really did hold up. What he found to be true with schedules of reinforcement and principles of reinforcement such as extinction and negative reinforcement has held up very well. What he found out with non-humans has held up very well with humans. Okay, and then another thing, if you take a look at this, 1938, you see the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis didn't start until 30 years later. It took a relatively long period of time before people started thinking about applying these principles to human behavior. Now, depending on who you talk to, when was the first, what was called then, behavior modification study? When was the first one published? Some people will say it was 1959 when Carl Williams published an article on using extinction with a boy who was crying every time his parents put him to sleep. Even if you take that as the first article, it took more than 20 years before people were doing it. Okay, the active period for doing it was the 60s, the early 60s. And as I said, I was in graduate school in the mid and late 60s. And like many other graduate students who I went to Florida State with, we were immediately taken with applied behavior analysis. Most of them did not stay in it, as I obviously did. Most of them left it and went to other fields. But at least when they were in graduate school, most people were very attracted to what was going on at the time. So in the early 60s, there was a small number of studies being done in behavior modification, some of which hold up to this day. One of the most amazing studies was done by Wolf, Risley, and Meese. It was published, I think, around 1964, where they shaped the behavior of a kid who was breaking his glasses. The kid's name was Dickie. He had to wear these glasses, or he had macular degeneration. He had to wear these glasses. If he didn't wear these glasses, he was going to go blind. And Montrose Wolf, who was the first author, and really my hero in the field of applied behavior analysis, used a shaping procedure to get, and with Risley and Meese, to get the kid to wear these glasses. So if he came near the glasses, first of all, he took the lenses out because it was getting very expensive. So if the kid came near the glasses, a reinforcer would be delivered. Came a little bit closer, till he touched it, till he brought it close to his face. A very, very difficult process. And then when I was working in this field, my first job working in this field was at a mental institution, a mental retardation institution, what it was called at the time, Sunland Hospital in Tallahassee. When we were teaching kids to walk, I would have a copy of the Wolf, Risley, and Meese article on my desk, and I would use it for the process of teaching kids to walk. That's how useful it was. So studies were starting to pop up really around the mid-60s, and people were giving more attention to the whole process. It took until about 1968 when the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis was born. So here again, I was in graduate school at the time, and I have to tell you, I was so into the field that it's called JABA. When JABA came out, I would put everything else aside, and I would read the issue of JABA until I got it finished. I'm not exactly like that now, but back then, that's what I was doing. I was so into it that as soon as it came out, I would read it that night as much as I could possibly get done. So the article that that launched the journal was the article by Baer, Donald Baer, Montrose Wolf, and Todd Risley. Okay, three of the founders of the field above and beyond this particular article. And it's hard to grasp the magnitude of contribution that the Baer, Wolf, and Risley article was, being published in 1969. There was only a smattering of studies that had been published at that time. They were very good studies, but none of them would meet present-day standards for publication, not because they weren't good, but because additional requirements. There was only a smattering of studies that were done, and they put together a field in this article. They gave us measurement procedures. They gave us research designs that we can use. They made it, they legitimately now renamed the field. Instead of calling it behavior modification, which was a less, had less gravitas to it, they called it applied behavior analysis, which is a much more scientific term. And they have laid the foundation, what we've done ever since that time. They made it, ABA into a conceptual system, into a science. So unfortunately, none of those people are with us anymore, but their contributions far exceed their lifetimes. And I want to say that, you know, in spite of my having said that, there are now articles coming out. I mean, I have the issue with me in the Behavior Analyst that are challenging a lot of what Baer, Wolf, and Risley did. So they had, for example, 6 criteria that you had to meet in order to get an article published. And now there are articles coming out by, I must say, very prestigious people, Critchfield and Reed, that are saying we have to lighten up on these requirements. You know, that there are studies that need to be done that do not meet these requirements. We can use other research designs. We can use other measurement procedures. And so that's a debate that has just begun at this time, or at least has become made explicit at this time. And I read a response to that, and a favorable one to the Critchfield and Reed article. Whenever we can meet the criteria of Baer, Wolf, and Risley, we should meet it. But when we can't, we should still do the research. And I don't know the history for this, but I know that the most important study in autism, in the field of autism, was Lovaas, 1987. I don't know why, but it's not published in the Behavioral Journal. I don't know if he felt that we get more exposure by sending it to another journal, or if he didn't send it to a behavioral journal because he felt that it wouldn't be accepted. I don't know the history, but I do feel really bad that article, the most important article in the history of autism, is not in the Behavioral Journal. I believe it's in the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology, which isn't particularly sympathetic to behavioral approach. Okay, so if you take a look here, 1968, what was happening? You know, what happened from the years of 1968 to the year 1982? Lots of very good things happened. The field was being established. We were attracting students into the field. And we didn't know everything, as we never will. But so we dealt with some very difficult problems. And typically the way we dealt with these problems was, let's take some, I'm going to use the example of self-injury because it leads us into the Awada and article with his colleagues. So suppose you had a problem like self-injury between 1968 and 1982. How did you treat it? Okay, well, having had to deal with those problems, I can tell you how we treated it. We started off, we didn't know that much about the behavior. By the way, we made an assumption about self-injurious behavior. Anybody want to guess what we thought caused self-injurious behavior? Take a shot at it. Why would you injure yourself? I mean, it's easy to understand hitting somebody else, but why do you hit yourself? We assumed it was done for what? Right. We assumed it was done for attention. And history is to show that it usually wasn't done for attention. We assume that, okay? That's why we have a science here, because our assumptions don't always hold up. So it's getting back to the problem of self-injury. How did we handle that between 1968 and 1982? Well, what we tried to do, even though we assumed it was done for attention, you couldn't just ignore self-injury. What we tried to do was program reinforcement for the absence of self-injury. So let's say you go 2 minutes without self-injuring. A reinforcer is delivered. Okay, you repeat that process, you try to draw it out. Was it successful some of the time? It was. Was it successful all the time? It wasn't. Okay? So what did you do when it wasn't using reinforcement alone wasn't successful? Frequently, there would be a punishment procedure used to decrease the behavior. And was that effective? Often it was effective. It was very effective, but people still objected to it. You know, there's a debate that will never end probably about whether it's ethical under any conditions to use punishment, but you can say the combination of reinforcement for appropriate behavior and punishment for inappropriate behavior was very often effective. So there was the ethical debate that was raised, but I think another debate that was equally important, or raised by the Iwata and et al. Article, I believe it was done at the Kennedy Krieger Institute right near here. Is that correct? Okay. I mean, I know it was done there. That's near here, though. Okay. Well, it's a small state, right? So, okay, everything's nearby. So the Iwata et al. Article is a breakthrough article in the field, without doubt. It's probably been cited more than any other article in applied behavior analysis now. And what they did is they took a look at self-injury, and they started what became the functional analysis of it. Okay, so what happens if they do experimental conditions with it? So we think, let's say it's possibly caused by attention. Okay, so a person self-injures, and you give them a lot of attention. You say, the attention can be a reprimand, but it's still attention. Like, don't do that. You're not supposed to do that. Keep your hands down, okay? You do something like that. And you take a look to see if the behavior increased when you did that. Sometimes it did, but often it didn't. Okay, they had other conditions they were interested in too. One of the conditions was negative reinforcement. So I give you an assignment, and you start self-injuring. Now, what are you likely to do when I do that? Take it away, and really fast too, don't you? You take it away right away. Okay, so we've all done that. By the way, just because you're a behaviorist doesn't mean you don't make these mistakes. We've all done that. Just I do it knowingly, but I do it. You do it sometimes anyway. Anyway, and so. That turned out to be, by the way, the most common reason for self-injury was negative reinforcement. You give somebody something, she starts self-injuring, you take it away. Okay, and they had other conditions. Another condition is there were some situations where you leave a person by himself who's self-injuring. You leave him by himself, and he continues to self-injure. You give him attention. He self-injures, but at the same rate that he was doing it before. So the term that I think that Brian Iwata prefers for this, it was automatically reinforcing. So now we had at least three causes of self-injury, three possible causes of self-injury: attention, negative reinforcement, and that it was self-reinforcing. The article was a breakthrough for many reasons. One is now we could be more effective. If we did a functional analysis, we could be more effective. And also, as a science, we can say now that after you do a functional analysis, you have a full understanding of the behavior before you attempt to alter it. That wasn't the case when we just sort of automatically found another behavior to reinforce, or we combined it with punishment. So the article is a breakthrough, and Brian Iwata, I think, is the most important applied behavior analyst since the founders. He's certainly the most productive. His work continues, and we owe him a debt for that, and for all the other work that he's done. Okay, so taking a look at what was on the previous slide, and where I'm trying to get you to think in terms of another direction, is that what's common to all of this, Skinner's work, most of the articles in JABA, functional analysis, was a focus on the consequences of behavior. And this has been, as I have up here, this has been very fertile ground for us. Okay, we have solved a lot of problems by focusing on the consequences of behavior. But I want you to think in terms of one additional thing besides the consequences. I don't know if you ever heard the term the ABCs of behavior. So there's an antecedent, there's a behavior, and then there's a consequence. Okay, we certainly focused on behavior, and we have certainly focused on the consequences. Now I want you to think more in terms of antecedents. Now I'm not implying that nobody here has ever thought about antecedents. You've all thought about antecedents, but what I want to talk about is going into more depth about antecedents that we can look at that will help us bring any behaviors under control. Okay, so our discussion, so I want to get a few terms under control here. Okay, so today's discussion is going to be on the antecedents of behavior, but I purposely am using the term triggers of behavior. Okay, so when Terry invited me to do this, and I described what I was going to do, he said, "Oh, you mean the antecedents of behavior?" And I said, "Yeah, but the reason that we use trigger, the term trigger, I'll give you some history of where all this came from shortly, but we use the term trigger because we're trying to emphasize the automaticness with which some behaviors occur. If you say, there are certain things that trigger problem behaviors. So I wanted to use a stronger term. We wanted to use a stronger term than the term antecedent. Okay, and also in terms of other terms, the person receiving services. Now, at Chimes of Delaware, where I'm a consultant, we typically use the term consumer. But when I think of consumer, I basically think of my grandchildren. So, okay. I prefer to use the term client, so that's the term I'm going to use today. And then the third one, who provides the services? The behavior analyst, the RCT, we're having more of that now, more RCTs. Okay. When we initially devised these materials, we devised them for teachers, and so I've given this talk maybe 3 or 4 other times. I was going to change the term from teacher to applied behavior analyst. I could do RCT, and I thought, what's wrong with calling you teacher? That's what you are, right? So I think I'm giving you a compliment when I call you a teacher. So I'm going to refer to the teacher. And never mind the fact, I have to do this because my wife was a teacher. I have to always say good things about it. Okay. So, go to the next one here. The role of functional analysis in altering behavior. Okay. There have been amazingly impressive gains made with functional analysis of behavior. Yet the truth of the matter is very few facilities can actually do a full functional analysis. Now, what I'm referring to is that there have traditionally been 3 components of functional analyses. The first has been to do interviews. Okay, now, everybody loves to do the interviews, right? They're really fun. And by the way, people love to be interviewed. Okay, the teachers, okay, whether the RCTs, love to be interviewed, and they give tremendously valuable information. My first job working in this field was at Sunland Hospital. The term then was for kids with mental retardation. And I was very ambitious, and I was trying to pick out some kids that I was going to try to teach to walk. And I would watch the kids, and I said, this is a candidate, that's a candidate. And I came to the conclusion there were like 5 or 6 kids that we could teach to walk. When I asked the staff, they gave me different information. And these are people who worked with the kids all the time. And I was saying, well, I'm going to go with my own reaction. I regretted it immediately. People who work with the kids on a daily basis are with people on a daily basis are the experts. They know lots of things that you will not know if you're not there all the time. So the interviews give some valuable information. They're a good starting point, but the research has shown that the interviews enough are not sufficient. They're a good starting point. I think they're good for interpersonal contact between the staff and the behavior analyst. I think they're great for that, but they don't give final answers. So the second component of it does work sometimes, and that is to collect data. What preceded the behavior and what followed the behavior. At Chimes of Delaware, we're going to have some automated data collection system put in very shortly. I think it's going to start almost any day now. And we'll be able to get these data much more readily. So we find out what typically preceded this behavior, what typically follows it. So you have interviews, and then you have the ABC data collection. Does that give you definitive results? Sometimes. It's good, but it doesn't always give you definitive results. What does give definitive results is the experimental analyses, where you physically manipulate the conditions that I mentioned in the Iwata et al. Article. What's the problem with that? Anybody want to help me with that? What's the problem with doing that experimental analysis? I know some people know the answer here. The problem is you're off. Go ahead, David. Yeah. People look at it that way. Now, there's a difference. There's a huge difference between the respect that we get as behavior analysts and what the respect that physicians get, right? So people object to the fact that we're actually causing these behaviors to occur because, you know, there could be some self-injury in there. But you compare that, say, to an allergist who, you know, tries, you know, does an experiment on your arm and sees what you're allergic to. So, at any rate, I think it's true. Is this true, Lois, that you're not even allowed to do experimental analyses in the state of Delaware? It's unethical. Is it true? Can anybody tell me about other states? Are you allowed to do experimental analyses in Maryland? You can't. Okay. Probably the effects of the Kennedy Krieger Institute. Okay. So I think that functional analyses, if you can do them, the full functional analysis where you include the experimental conditions, I think it gives us great outcomes. I feel like it is ethical to expose a person to a little bit of this problem so that we can make a major change in their lives. Okay, I mean, I should tell you, I'm getting shoulder surgery in a week, okay? And I'm going to be in miserable condition for at least 5 weeks. But nobody says that the orthopod is a sadist, right? Okay, so one of the limitations to functional analysis, and I disagree, I mean, I wish this were not a limitation to it. One of the limitations is you can't always do the full functional analysis, okay, because prohibitions, for example, in the state of Delaware. Okay, also, functional analyses deal with one particular problem. They deal with one type of behavior. They deal with behaviors that are emitted, okay, operant behaviors. They're emitted behaviors, but some behaviors are elicited. Now, those of you who have taken the behavior analysis exam know that there's not just operant behavior, there's also respondent behaviors, and these are behaviors that are elicited. Functional analysis is not actually dealing directly with those behaviors, okay? So functional analysis is typically dealing with operant behaviors, and I want to make a case that we have a methodology for also dealing with non-operant behaviors. So we have respondent behaviors. Now, everybody has heard of Pavlov's dog and the fact that he dealt with respondent behaviors and respondent conditioning. I have to tell you, all the years that I taught applied behavior analysis courses, even when the course didn't say it, I taught it anyway. All the years that I taught it, you spent maybe a half a class on respondent behaviors and respondent conditioning, right? Okay, in spite of that, people say you do applied behavior analysis if they heard of it. I said, what's your field? I said, applied behavior analysis. If they heard of it, it has nothing to do with Pavlov's dog or something like that. I said, no, it had very little to do with Pavlov's dog, okay? So there are respondent behaviors, and there are also adjunctive behaviors. How many people here have heard about adjunctive behaviors? Okay. Okay, or you? Always ruins it for me. Okay. 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 So I want to talk a little bit about adjunctive behaviors. Now, I want to tell you something that I had not heard of adjunctive behaviors until I got involved in this project of trigger analysis. I learned about, I said I'd give you some background how I got involved with the trigger analysis. The trigger analysis was founded, people who did the founding work on trigger analysis are Amos Roladair, who's a professor at a university in Israel, and Ron Van Houten, a friend of mine who's a professor at Western Michigan University. So they were the ones who were working on this, and they just kind of hit a dead end. They asked me if I would get involved in it. I did get involved in it, and then around that time, Ron Van Houten kind of lost interest in it. He became much more involved with other things like road safety issues and criminal behavior. So he dropped out, and so then eventually Amos Roladair and I wrote a short book on it. You were asking if there's anything been written on it. There's a short book written on that, and different components have been researched, okay? So, I learned through them what adjunctive behavior was, okay? I think it's an important behavior. I think it's given very little attention in the literature. So, let me go to the next one here. I went the wrong way, okay. Okay. So, adjunctive behavior has been very much noted in the basic experimental analysis of behavior literature. It comes up all the time. But I guarantee you will recognize them very shortly. Actually, I'll give you the definition. It's excessive and persistent behaviors induced by interval schedules of reinforcement. Okay, so what this means, I'll have to translate it into English now. These behaviors are also called interim behaviors. And what they refer to is that when you're in a situation, when you're receiving an interval schedule of reinforcement, what do you do between intervals? And let me give you a very everyday example of this. What do you do when you're in a traffic jam? An endless traffic jam. You sit there, but what are the kind of emotional behaviors that you engage in when you're in a traffic jam? Especially when you find out it's been caused by the government. I said no politics. Okay. So when you're in a traffic jam and you're waiting and waiting, you what did you say, Jim? You curse. What did you say, John?
Rageful.
Rage behaviors. Okay. These are when your interval schedule of reinforcement, and this is a variable interval schedule of reinforcement. You don't know when the behavior is when the reinforcer is going to be delivered. The reinforcer is the traffic jam has cleared. You engage in all kinds of emotional behaviors. I have a friend who was caught in a traffic jam. He had, this is many years ago, he had a date with a woman in New Jersey. And he was caught in a traffic jam. And he was caught, and after a while, he got so angry, he took his fist and smashed it against the dashboard. And he did something like $200 worth of damage. So I said to him, are you going to have another date with this woman? He says, I don't think so. My car can't take it. Okay, so we're talking about situations where you're waiting for a reinforcement to occur, and you don't know when it's going to occur. And if you go back to early years, this is a variable interval schedule of reinforcement. What happens when you're waiting? What happened when you're expecting in the old days when they would send grades by the mail? So your grades are due. You're hoping they're going to come on Wednesday. How often do you check the mail? You know it doesn't come until after 2, but there you are at 8 in the morning checking the mail. I mean, so interval schedules of reinforcement cause lots of emotional behaviors, okay? And what's pretty amazing, I think, about adjunctive behaviors, and I think it might be true even about respondent behaviors, is that they may go on indefinitely even without reinforcement. Think about that. In other words, you may maintain these emotional responses to interval schedules of reinforcement, even though there's no reinforcement involved in it. So these behaviors may go on indefinitely. And what I'm saying is that if we're dealing with operant behaviors, functional analysis gives us very good information. Okay? If we're dealing with respondent behaviors, we may not get that information. And if we're dealing with adjunctive behaviors, we may not get that information. Okay, so what I want to do is talk about antecedent behaviors and get into a discussion of triggering events. Okay. Tell me if I'm right about this. Some people are very well behaved, and then they suddenly act out. Have you ever seen that? Okay. There's a triggering event. Tell me some triggering events that you can identify. You worked in this field all this time. Tell me some triggering events. Being told no is a triggering event. I should ask I should go to everybody and ask this. Okay. Tell me triggering events that you come across.
Increased volume.
Pardon?
Increased noise.
Yeah. And Mark just pointed out increased noise. My wife and I went to a play that was right at Route 95 in Philadelphia. The noise level was so loud, I didn't have anybody, I was rattled by it. And I didn't have any, and there was a beer garden there, and people were sitting there drinking beer and having fun. The noise level was just amazing. So absolutely, noise level. What else? What are triggering events? Give me some more. Reagan, say it loudly.
A particular person entering a room.
Absolutely. Okay. Person enters the room. Sometimes it's rational. Maybe it's somebody you once were in a relationship with. What does that do to your emotional responding? Depends on what?
How it ended.
Well, they all end the same way. What about somebody enters the room who you had an argument with? Did you ever notice that if you're in a large group and there's somebody in the room you used to be in a relationship with or you had an argument with and you're not talking to, how there's this sort of this pull to check them out? You can look all around the room and look very natural, but that one person, you're trying not to look. And okay, so, okay, you gave me some triggering events. Okay, so the behavior might be respondent, it might be operant, it might be adjunctive, okay? But any event, what we're doing here is concentrating on the antecedent or the triggering event. And dealing with triggering events might be more profitable for teachers, I'm using that term generically, to use than consequent events. And one of the reasons is that many antecedent manipulations are low maintenance. And what I mean is that, for example, I did a study once in a classroom in which I walked into the classroom and they had these kids sitting at tables. That's kind of like the new artsy way of teaching, right? You have kids sitting at four or six kids to a table. I had that in some of my classrooms. I was talking to the backs of people's heads, you know, and I mean, I would actually get into class early and rearrange the desks so that they had to be in rows. Okay, so we did a study on comparing kids in table formation versus in row formation. And row formation came out much better. After that, we didn't have to do anything else. We just have to put them in rows after that. That was a relatively low maintenance situation. Applying consequences is more high maintenance. Even if you're using something like compliments, by the way, I'm very happy to report I have young grandchildren in public schools, and one penetration that we've made, Jimmy and I were talking about this yesterday, one penetration that ABA has made into regular education is I really see teachers using compliments at a high rate. I'm really happy that that's happening. I mean, I basically went through elementary school without a compliment. Now, I don't know if that's based on my behavior, so that has been happening. But still, if I have to compliment you every 10 minutes, that's still fairly high maintenance, right? If I change the physical environment, that's relatively low maintenance. So, for example, at Chimes in the workshop that we have, it's very frequently the case that we'll change who's sitting next to whom. If you get the right arrangement, that's a big deal, right? You don't have to keep, it doesn't require daily attention like the point systems that we have. So, and it appears to me, I don't have it up here, but my experience in working in classrooms, teachers see themselves as more as manipulators of antecedent conditions than of consequences. It's very hard to get teachers to use, for example, a token reinforcement system for a long period of time. But arranging the classroom is something that they're more likely to do. And by the way, one other thing I'm going to tell you, that in one of the schools that two of my grandchildren go to, they even use, they give out Smarties, little stickers that are Smarties. They have stickers. I mean, it's, Jimmy and I had a very good conversation yesterday and talked about how little impact we've had on society. Fred Kellogg, one of the founders of this field, one of the most wonderful people I've ever met, said that we tend to nibble away at society's problems. So we haven't had a huge impact on regular education, but we have some. They have star charts. One day, one of my grandsons came running home to me. He said, Saba, guess what? I just earned lunch with the teacher. And it was amazing that he would learn, he, of all people, would have done that. Okay. So what I'm saying is that, let's see where we are in here. Okay. So I'm saying it might be more profitable for us to look for antecedents. Okay. Any comments about what I have up here when I say, in my experience, teachers see themselves as more as manipulators of antecedents than consequences? Comments on that? Okay. Okay, also, so I hate to get up here and try to make too much of a case for ignorance, but there's a little bit of that in this, and that is that what I'm saying is that we take a look at a behavior, and we may not know whether it's an operant behavior or a respondent behavior, an adjunctive behavior. But it doesn't mean that we can't deal with it. So we see a trigger. We don't know exactly what the basis of this trigger is, but still, maybe we can work with that trigger and do something about it. I'm going to talk about what we can do about that. And I found a citation that I like. This is James Herbert, a guy who does wonderful research in the field of autism. Last that I saw of him, he was at Drexel University, and he says that we might find that an intervention works without knowing exactly why. And according to Herbert, there's a long history of this in many fields. I think probably there are medicines that work that we don't know why they work, but they do work. And we have a choice. Do we wait till we know exactly why it works, or do we use it when we have evidence that it's going to be effective? And so I'm trying to say that about this, too. We may not know exactly why the behavior is occurring, whether it's operant, whether it's respondent, whether it's adjunctive, but we can work with it anyway. Again, I'm going to mention something else. as long as I'm trying to make a case for ignorance here. There's an article in the Behavior Analyst by David Palmer. I don't recall the name of it, but David does absolutely wonderful work. And I had these romanticized views of behavioral science, is that one day we'll know the answer to everything. You know, it's a little extreme, but that's how I looked at it. You know, I was taken with applied behavior analysis. I thought, and he said in this article in the Behavior Analyst, he said, very few studies of social relevance have ever been done and ever will be done. I actually it just staggered me when I read it. And I know David fairly well. I talked to him about it, and I said, David, you nailed that one. You know, it was really, it upset my apple cart for sure. But he said what he said is that very few studies of social relevance ever have been done or ever will be done. How does that make you feel? And what that means is that we're going to have to proceed, if he's right, and I think he is, and it took me a while to come to terms with that, we're going to have to proceed without knowing everything. Okay? Comments from anybody on that? Okay, so trigger analysis does not negate the importance of consequences of behavior. Positive reinforcement is central to trigger analysis. What trigger analysis is doing, and I'll give you an example of this shortly, is trying to give you something to reinforce. Okay? So this, to me, one of the issues is that we have situations that we're involved in, very practical situations, and we would love to use reinforcement techniques, and there's nothing to reinforce. The trigger analysis is trying to give you something to prompt the behavior so you now have something to reinforce. So none of this is a negation of consequences of behavior. This field wouldn't exist without our full immersion in the consequence of behavior. What I'm trying to make a point, though, is we need to have some way of prompting the behavior so we have something to reinforce. Comments from anybody?
Is there any data or any article that supports that? It seems to me, in going to Delaware anyway, you know, a lot of this has been discredited by the state, particularly consequence of behavior.
Well, you know, consequence of behavior, it certainly includes positive reinforcement too. Delaware hasn't ruled out positive
It's
reinforcement.
out of balance.
Yeah.
I mean, at least the approach there is out of balance. And I know when we speak to the state about these issues, we have the data to support, but again, it's been discredited. And I guess what I'm asking is there any literature, any data that supports the value of the consequence of behavior?
The value of
The value to it.
the
To indicate that balanced approach is something that's really required.
balance between what and what?
Between positive reinforcement and then again, a consequence.
Okay. Let me just say, Skinner, when he came up with the terms for behavior analysis, sometimes created his own terms. Like negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement. He created terms. Other times he took terms from the vernacular, like punishment and consequences. When Skinner referred to consequences, he meant anything that comes after a behavior. So positive reinforcement is a consequence, and punishment is a consequence. So I understand, that some people, they'll say to you, there are consequences for that behavior. They'll say that as if it only means punishment. So, and some of it was caused by that. Clearly, Skinner made the case for positive reinforcement. That's the real contribution of behavioral psychology, is positive reinforcement. So he was always making a case for positive reinforcement, and in my own, and not always humble opinion, sometimes made more of a case than was actually there. I mean, it's not been possible to do everything with positive reinforcement, and he attacked, at some point, he attacked punishment techniques and said they don't have a long-lasting effect on behavior. But research, for example, done by Azin and Holtz showed that at high intensities of punishment, it does have a long-lasting effect. And that really, if punishment doesn't have a long-lasting effect, you can make the same complaint with positive reinforcement. If you stop using it, or use the same one over and over again. So in terms of balance, Skinner was extremely oriented toward positive reinforcement. Okay, thanks for the question, Todd. Any other comments on that? Okay, so let's see. I think, okay, we'll take another 5 minutes and we'll take a break. Any comments before I keep saying that? Okay. Terry?
I think what John was getting at is in Delaware, you are not allowed to use anything for behavior reduction, correct?
That's correct.
And so what we've had a conversation about is there's a book by, it's an older book, Alternatives to Punishment by Danellen and Lavinia. And in the beginning of the book, they speak to due process rights as a civil rights issue.
Yeah.
And under due process comes the right to effective treatment. And so I was explaining, and you were in this meeting, that Delaware has essentially put themselves in a position where if a parent, and I use an extreme example, if a parent has a child who's headbanging on glass for attention-maintained behavior as the function, but the state now says to Kaori or Lois, you cannot use any aversive procedures, you can only use positive reinforcement, and that's against what the research would indicate, that you have to get, the combined reduction and increase. Were a parent to sue, and I've seen it done, they sue under the civil rights provision that individual's due process right has been violated, and they find themselves in federal court without the benefit of insurance, which I think a lot of times bureaucrats hide behind the veil. This is my political statement for the day. In the state of New Jersey, Vivian and I were involved with a case in the District of Matawan where a district just arbitrarily, we were having a good treatment impact on a kid, Dominic, where he had very, very severe behaviors. I think broke a finger on somebody, broke somebody's tooth, and yet we addressed it when we were getting a reduction in and we were using a contingent effort procedure, which was a mild aversive, concurrently with teaching him how to ask for things like you saw in the video. The district came out and just flatly said, no, we're done. We're not going to do any more of that negative stuff. And the attorney sued on behalf of the parents, and it ended up in federal court. The district administrator found out to her dismay that when you are sued under a civil rights violation, in this case the right to effective treatment through due process, you don't have the cover of your insurance blanket from the district. And she lost her job. I believe she lost the case, and the district lost millions of dollars. I keep waiting. This is the thing I keep on saying over and over. In the Mid-Atlantic region, you guys apparently need some very, very well-trained Brooklyn lawyers down here to step up to the plate.
Well, just taking on Terry's point, part of the purpose of the right to effective treatment article that we worked on was that, when people have a right to effective treatment, that you can't leave behaviors, behaviors like self-injury, in that it's not, you don't want people to be self-injuring indefinitely to do damage, and that certainly is preferable that you not use punishment techniques, but that they shouldn't be ruled out when they seem to be the only effective treatment. Have we won that battle or lost it? I don't know. The article on right to effective treatment gets cited a whole lot in the behavior analysis literature. I haven't seen it cited so much out of the behavior analysis literature. Have we had a huge impact on the field with that? It doesn't appear to me that we have. Okay. And there was, then you mentioned Lavinia and Donnellan's book. I read the book and I read a review of the book, and it was published in the Behavior Analyst, and there was basically an absence of data there. It was, I think I remember that they gave recommendations. There was this binge they went on for like 4 pages, where they gave recommendations for 4 pages with no relevant citations. Just think that you give all these recommendations on how to do it, and there was no relevant citation. 2 pages without any citations, and then there were 2 irrelevant citations in there. So that's what we're up against.